I've created several cross patterns, but I believe this is the first one featuring a figure of Jesus on the cross. The figure is cut from quarter-inch thick material, and with only one interior cut, it's not difficult to make. The cross and base are made from half-inch thick wood and utilize a slot and groove construction to connect the two parts. This provides a strong joint. I used Baltic birch plywood for the figure and walnut for the cross and base, and I used a warm satin spray polyurethane to complete the project. It's early April, Easter's coming up soon, and I've decided to add another one of these themed projects. This is Jesus on the cross. I've had a couple that were he is risen and so on, but there had to be a crucifixion before there could be a resurrection. So I'm going to make this one today. There's only 3 parts. There's the cross, Jesus on the cross, and a base, and so there's not much to it. It'll be very easy, and let me show you how to make it. I called for a quarter-inch thick material for Jesus, so I'm going to put this on quarter-inch Baltic birch plywood. I looked for some maple, but I didn't have any maple that was quite wide enough. And I'm going to make the cross and the base out of walnut, half-inch walnut. It was called for, so I took some 4/4 and cut it down to half-inch, planed it down a half-inch. The little note I get when I pluck the scroll saw blade indicates that I have the proper tension on the blade. For this quarter-inch Baltic birch plywood, I'm using a number 3 Pegasus modified geometry blade. As always, I'm making the interior cut first. This one's easy, and it will only take a few seconds to cut. I decided to slow the blade down a bit. Since this plywood is only a quarter-inch thick, the blade is cutting a little too aggressively. Decreasing the speed will make cutting go more smoothly. If the blade is too aggressive, you may find yourself overshooting turns and having trouble cutting fine details. I'd just replaced the blade, and a new sharp blade cuts faster than a worn blade, so that was adding to the problem. There are some what I would call detail cuts around Jesus' edge. Sometimes I make these cuts as I go, other times I come back to them. I will likely revisit some or all of these. With the outline of Jesus complete, I removed the exterior waist piece, and now it will be easy to make those detail cuts. Without that waist area in the way, I can quickly move the figure to the starting position for each of these cuts. I cut, back out, and then move to the starting point for the next cut. Having this much freedom of movement came in especially handy while making the cuts around Jesus' head. Making these cuts continuously is difficult because there are sharp turns and they're very close together. By cutting from the outside, you can cut in one direction, back out, and then make the next cut in the opposite direction. That makes it unnecessary to make those nearly impossible turns at the sharp inside points and makes the very difficult outside points relatively easy. Now I can move on to the base and the cross. Since these are both made from half-inch walnut, I switched to a number 5 Pegasus modified geometry blade. I base my blade size choice on the hardness and thickness of the wood as well as the complexity of the pattern. For a comprehensive discussion on this topic, I've included a link to my video on the subject in the description and on the screen. I'll start with the slot in the center of the base. I drilled a pilot hole using my drill press and threaded the blade through it, then tightened the blade in the upper blade holder. I cut from the pilot hole to one of the corners and stopped when I reached it. Then I backed the blade up slightly, just enough so it was no longer cutting. That allowed me to use the kerf the blade had just created, plus the waist area, to pivot the workpiece 90 degrees in the direction I wanted to cut next. Then I pushed the wood forward and into the blade again. This is my standard procedure for cutting inside corners. It's essential to have sharp corners for this inside cut because the tab from the cross will fit into it. If the corners are slightly rounded, the tab may not fit. Conversely, if the slot is too big, the tab will be easy to insert, but the cross might wobble slightly. You can't rely on glue alone for this type of connection. A tight mechanical fit is more solid, and it also looks better. The base is cut from the same board as the cross will be, so I used the corner of the waist piece to check for fit. It was a little too big, so I marked a line parallel to one of the sides and brought it back to the scroll saw. I'd rather have the slot too small to begin with because I can always go back and enlarge it a little as I did here. If you get the slot too large to start with, you're either stuck with an opening that's too wide or you have to scrap the entire piece and start over again. As we came to the cross itself, I started at the bottom. I wanted the tab to be as accurate as possible so it would fit snugly in the slot. I mounted the pattern so the bottom of the tab was square with the board's edge, so I know the bottom is perfectly straight. I started at the left side of the tab, cut vertically to the intersection, and then eased up pressure so the blade was at the intersection but no longer cutting. With the blade still running, I pivoted the workpiece 90 degrees, utilizing the waist area and the curve the saw blade had just created to make the turn. Once I was past the edge of the semicircle edge of the slot, I cut through the waist area to the board's edge. I wanted to complete the other side of the tab before starting on the cross outline, so I repeated this process on the tab's other side. I started the next cut at the underside of the cross's crossbar. It ended near the board's edge, so it was a convenient place to start. I cut along the horizontal line until I reached the intersection with the vertical line for the cross's upright beam. I used my usual technique for making the 90-degree corner. I cut to the intersection, then backed the blade off just enough that it was no longer cutting. With the blade still running, I used the saw blade's curve plus a tiny bit of waste space to pivot the workpiece 90 degrees. Once I had it facing in the direction I wanted to cut next, I started cutting again. This cut was a long straight line that took me to the semicircular top of the base. I used the same technique to make the 90-degree turn, followed the line across, then around to the bottom of the slot. The vertical cut on the other side was a mirror image of the one I just described, so there was no need to show me doing it. I chose the easy way to cut the left side of the crossbar. I made the vertical cut, but instead of using the usual technique for 90-degree corners, I cut past the intersection and off the board's edge. Then I could return and start the next cut from the edge. You can use this technique anytime you have outside corners to cut that are near the edge of a board. I followed the line to the intersection where I had a choice of how to make the inside corner. The first choice would be to make the corners I've done with several already, but because of its location, there was a second choice. I cut to the intersection and backed out rather than make a 90-degree turn. I started at the outer edge of the vertical line and cut along it to the intersection where I just stopped cutting. Once I reached the point where I'd stopped cutting before, the cut was completed and I was able to remove the waste piece. Cutting this way ensures a nice, sharp 90-degree angle. The remaining cuts were repeats of one technique or the other for making 90-degree corners. If you plan on doing much scroll sawing, making 90-degree turns is a skill you'll need to hone because it's something you will be doing often. This will be an easy glue up, but I studied it briefly to decide where to apply it. I only want glue on parts that will be touching because if I get glue anywhere it isn't needed, it will prevent the finish from adhering to those places. I put glue in only one place on the cross where Jesus' middle touches it. Then I applied glue to Jesus' hands and feet. Jesus is cut from 1/4-inch plywood, so I want to use strong clamping pressure in several places. Thin material tends to warp when glue is applied, so this step is critical. I have several medium-sized spring clamps that are perfect for this application. I'll set this aside to dry, then attach the cross to the base, let that dry, and complete the project with a warm satin spray polyurethane. I'm pretty pleased with the way this project turned out. It makes a beautiful display. There were no complex parts, so you could easily make one in an afternoon. I love reading your comments, and I respond to every one of them. Subscribe and hit the notification bell, and you won't miss any future videos. But until then, 2 suggested videos to watch next are on the screen.